So I'll start out with the LTC part of it. You know, when we're talking about manslaughter or criminally negligent homicide, this is a person commits an offense if he recklessly causes the death of an individual. So that's manslaughter. If you're reckless and you cause the death, that recklessness caused the death of an individual, that's manslaughter. If a person commits an offense if he causes the death of an individual by criminal negligence, that's criminally negligent homicide. Okay, and so how these play, and I don't really know where I should start, but I'm going to start with, instead of going into those definitions first, I'm just going to go with the LTC part because I can knock these out. Okay, we get manslaughter. We get to ask for either a manslaughter lesser included of murder or something to that effect. If we were in a situation where we fired and killed somebody, we'd get to ask for that, or we'd be charged with manslaughter if, let's say, they often happen like an imperfect self-defense. We talk about when you're defending yourself, how you got to be in a place where you've got a right to be. Mm-hmm. You cannot have provoked that person. And so you often see a manslaughter charge or an imperfect self-defense claim, right, to ask for manslaughter instead of murder when you have a situation to say, I actually went to that person, and I think you're going to talk about ego states later on today, and I didn't use my ego states consciousness very well, and I got upset with this person and really came at them in an aggressive manner, and they end up coming back at me, but they escalate the situation. They escalate it, and now I've got to escalate it just to survive.
So one of those three things that if you're in a place you're supposed to be, if you're not doing criminal activity, so on and so forth, if you break one of those, you might have been right to defend yourself, but now you just got a manslaughter.
Yes, you had manslaughter charge. Okay, and so when you're in this case, you actually could be convicted, and at the punishment phase, the jury's going to have the option to find an imperfect self-defense and say, well, he deserved killing. You know, like, it's one of those.
Some men just need killing.
Time to kill.
That's just defense attorney humor. But what they'd really be wanting you to find is what I'd say is, okay, my guy's mental state wasn't there. He didn't really intend to do this. This was not this guy really overreacted to the provocation. This blew up because that guy didn't use his ego state consciousness either, right? And he really took it too far. This probably just would have been an argument without physical altercation, right. But that other person blew up. So I'm going to ask you you can actually ask for an acquittal. Okay, that doesn't happen very often.
Clarify that term, please.
An acquittal means not guilty.
Okay.
Okay, now you're guilty, you're already found guilty, right? And so, but they can actually just not impose any punishment. They can actually move for an acquittal, but that's a complicated process. But this can happen on an imperfect self-defense. It's just rare. Most of the time you're going to be wanting a manslaughter versus a murder charge. Okay, the other is, I wanted to point this out. This was a 1987 Court of Appeals case, and it said this blatantly. We're going to get into the definitions, but if you're asking me, you asked me last week or the week before, what is recklessness and negligence? It's hard to explain, right? But this is what this court said, and this is word for word. A defendant who is familiar with guns, who knows a gun is loaded, and who points it at another person, is consciously disregarding, and that's the key phrase, consciously disregarding a risk that his conduct, that is pointing a loaded weapon at another, may cause harm or death, and is at least reckless.
Yes, that's why we can't emphasize enough. Finger off the trigger, muzzle pointed in a safe direction.
And that's why we emphasize training in this. That's why we emphasize going through the steps, having a routine ready to go, so that you're confident, comfortable, and not nervous. And when you do point it, it's when it's in a justified situation. Okay, and so just know that if you're not justified, you've got courts that are going to say you are at least reckless for even picking that thing up and pointing it at another person. Okay, and then you're going to have self-defense raised in a manslaughter murder charge. In those kind of situations, you are going to be entitled to raise also your mental state. If you've had a family violence issue, you're going to be able to raise that and say, I deserve a manslaughter versus a murder, or I deserve lesser than a manslaughter, or something to that effect, because this was my mental state. I didn't have the same mental state as everybody else. Okay, and so we talk about the mental states. What do we mean by this? And so you have a mental aspect and a physical aspect. You have an intent, a mens rea, what we call it, okay, in the legal field, and an actus reus. You have conduct and you have a mental mind. Somebody either intends, knows, is conscious of something but disregards it, which would be recklessness, or they're so negligent that they have failed to perceive a risk that is so obvious and dangerous that any ordinary person, okay, in society would see this obvious and dangerous risk, okay, and so we held them criminally responsible for not perceiving it, okay, and so obviously a good way that I distinguish these four, I think to start off with, if you say intent, when we say somebody intends to do something, a good way of explaining this is that there was their goal.
Okay, yeah.
Let's say they set a house on fire wanting to kill a person.
I'll tell you what, man, what you're saying here sounds the most clear of law that I've heard in a while. I mean, there's other things that can get so convoluted, but this one, the way you're breaking it down, it sounds pretty easy to follow along here.
Yes, and I'm not following the definition. If we follow the definition of my words, you'd be like, huh? What? Okay.
That's why you're attorney extraordinary.
I mean, come on. And so and then so if we talk about knowledge, right, where intent is we have a goal to bring about this result or this harm or this conduct that we're doing, right? Knowledge would be, maybe it's not our goal. Maybe I saw a good on the internet. I wish I could, I don't want to plagiarize or anything. I wish I could quote him as a really good example. Maybe I want to burn documents in a house because they incriminate me. I don't want to kill the guy in there, right? I just want to burn the documents. But I know, right, that it's reasonably certain that if I set this house on fire, he's going to die. He may not, and I don't want him to. I really just want to destroy the documents, but I know it's a reasonable certainty that he could die by setting the house on fire. So I have knowledge of what I'm doing. Okay, and so when we talk about recklessness is, it's a gross deviation. It's something that it is a substantial risk. There's a really dangerous chance of this happening, and it's maybe not for certain, but there's a strong likelihood that it can happen, and it's so strong. And not only is it a strong likelihood that it can happen, the consequences of that thing happening are grave. Like there's a great chance of somebody being killed or injured. Okay, and so we consciously are aware. We know that this risk that is dangerous exists, yet we disregard it and go through with our conduct anyway. Okay, so I don't know for certain that this is going to happen, but I know that there's a strong possibility such that nobody else in society would take this risk, okay? But I disregard it. That's recklessness. Okay, and so that would be manslaughter. That goes into the definition of manslaughter. So when we talk about criminal negligence, it's not the same when we hear Rick Dodd talking about, right, proximate cause and foreseeability, what's reasonably foreseeable to the ordinary man. Yes, that has a play into this negligence part, but it's different because it's got to be such a grave risk, okay, that your failure to perceive this risk is so grave and so absurd, right, that we are going to hold you criminally responsible because anybody in that situation must, right, realize the dangerousness and obviousness of this danger. Whereas if you're having a civil case, right, it's, would a reasonable person be able to reasonably foresee this thing happening in the future? It wasn't such a grave risk. No, it could be a minor risk in the civil world. Minor risk. And I could just reasonably foresee or not foresee, and that's going to give me my result, right? Whether it happens or doesn't happen in the civil world as opposed to in the criminal world. There's no...
Ross, you gave a lot, and it's all clear to me. Can you, with all that we've talked about, give us a real quick, simple scenario of a self-defense act? Let's say it's in the home. You would think, oh, no way somebody could get manslaughter defending themselves in the home. Could you lay out some type of idea to the people out there?
Yeah, a couple gets into a fight. There's a gun under the bed. The man and woman rush to grab the gun on the bed. The man thinks that if I don't grab this gun, she's going to kill me, okay, or hurt somebody else. And so they're both rushing to the gun and they wrestle over the gun and the gun goes off and kills one. You'd think that would be a self-defense claim, and some defense attorneys might launch a self-defense claim. But if you remember, Rick several months ago said if you launch a self-defense claim, you're saying that you defended yourself against an attack. So really it was an intentional act. Really, there's been cases where when they're wrestling, the husband falls over a phone cord,
Well, let's change.
and the gun goes off.
Yeah.
And so that would be either reckless or negligent.
Let's change it a little bit more to you're okay in your home, but you're being aggressed upon by an outside force. The threat is coming into the home, and still you get a manslaughter charge. Could it be maybe because the threat was leaving and you decided to shoot him in the back when he was on the porch? Is that a manslaughter charge?
I don't ever foreclose any of those kinds of possibilities. I mean, any prosecutor can bring anything, and yeah, I think that there could be scenario, but like we said, these kinds of cases are so factual and so fact intensive and circumstance based, case by case basis, that it's hard to say exactly what fact may change the calculus.
Yeah.
But here's what's scary.
I mean, you could have it all the way perfect, and one little fact changes the whole spectrum of it, doesn't it?
What I wanted to tell people is that you think that these kinds of things don't apply to you, but in fact, you run a risk of getting charged with manslaughter or criminally negligent homicide every day you get in your car. And you say, no, I don't, I'm a safe driver. Look, accidents happen. And if an accident happens, it truly happens, if somebody dies, you are going to be at risk, right, of being prosecuted for criminal negligent homicide. That's why we've got to make sure that who we elect as our public officials, right, we elect the right ones that have common sense and realize that bad things happen, and just because somebody dies doesn't mean that somebody is criminally responsible. And I'll give you an example. In 2017, in July, I think it was the last year, it was nothing more than they were going down, two cars were going down a highway, the vehicle in front did not use their blinker. They were going under the speed limit. It was a 40-mile-an-hour speed limit, right? The vehicle forgets they have to turn, they make a sudden stop, don't use their blinker, right? And the other car rear ends them. Is not speeding or anything. Right, the jury he ends up getting charged with negligent homicide, goes to a jury trial, the jury convicts. Right? Then it goes to the Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals affirms that conviction. Okay, then it goes and gets reversed, thank goodness, by the Court of Criminal Appeals. But he had to spend all that money, hire all those lawyers, fight all that time, and go through all that stress and trouble, which was truly an accident. And the court says that this was an accident.
So why do you think that got to that point? What was so persuasive to get the jury to convict him?
Again, we don't know the backstory. There may be some other political maneuvers involved. Who knows? Okay, but it may have just been an overzealous prosecutor that is pressured by victims of the family because somebody died. Okay, and then you have those cases. Let's say,
yeah, you brought something that's very interesting. I mean, I know this, but you just said it, where you have a prosecutor, okay, gets elected. Let's say it's a small town area, and the prosecutor has good connections with people of a higher status, money, okay, and persuasiveness, so that when something happens and it happens to affect those people, there could be pressure put on that prosecutor to make certain decisions.
Exactly, and then there could be just also like a political group, not necessarily money wise. You could have one group of people in the community that all was behind a leader, and this leader dies or something happens to him, and so this group of people really pushes for some kind of charge, or it could be that maybe the prosecutor really feels for one certain victim. Who knows? It just, again, these are things that we don't see behind the scenes, but any number of reasons can cause these kinds of cases. But the fact remains, this was truly an accident. Okay, and now he was negligent. If Rick was to file a lawsuit, probably would get a wrongful death case, probably would get insurance money for that kind of case. There was some negligence there. He hit him in the back, should have been more aware, but was it a crime? Okay, there probably are some people out here, even listeners, that would disagree with me, but the majority of the people would not say that this is a criminal act. There was nothing else besides those facts, basically, that I'm telling you. Then you have, obviously, you need to be...
Let me give you an example of that. I'll give you a perfect example right here in Cameron. Going down 79 here, and somebody slows down to take a left-hand turn. They put their left-hand blinker on, and you know how you go to the right to pass them up? Well, they all of a sudden decide they wanted to go to the right, and bam, I hit them, but actually they hit me. I'm the one who got the ticket. So it's like,
right, and
I'm not guilty. They're the one who did it. Screw it.
And what was crazy about that case is to the same thing. The person who didn't use a blinker but got hit in the back, they got a ticket for not using their blinker. And the guy that ends up hitting in the back ends up getting charged with negligent homicide. And so you just have to make sure you're careful. This could have happened, really, I think, to anybody. Just a split second look down at the radio, look back up, also wham, they're right there, because they stopped all of a sudden. Okay, and You have these cases too, where obviously there's some cases where you don't hook a trailer up, right? You don't put the hooks in like you're required. Maybe just put the hitch on where the trailer comes off and kills somebody. That was a Tello case. That was reckless. That was recklessness because that was such a grave danger that when the trailer comes off, it came off on the highway. It could kill it. It could kill so many people. Okay, but he knew there was no hooks on there. And so if you could prove maybe that your buddy was with you and he said he got it, but he thought you got it, and there was miscommunication, maybe that would just be an accident. But the point is, we got to make sure that we're on our P's and Q's, even in little things such as driving, because if that trailer comes off, they're going to use a Tello case to go after you.
Yep.
Okay, and so we've got to be...
There's a case for everything, isn't there?
Oh, that's what one attorney said. I said, I got this case when I was young. I said, I got this case that says this. He said, well, I got this case that says this. I can find a case that says anything. Okay? And so judges especially do have a hard time a lot of times because, there's cases going both ways. And a lot of times the cases hinge on one little bitty fact that makes the whole thing just turn the opposite direction. And so sometimes being a judge is hard. But also in 2012, the Montgomery case, I know we talk about texting. This wasn't a texting case. The lady was talking on her cell phone and saw that and puts her cell phone down. And at the time that she hangs up the cell phone, she sees that she missed the exit, and so she kind of goes over the part that says the lines that says you can no longer cross over. I feel bad. I should know the name of that. But says you can no longer cross over to the exit ramp, which I've done a couple times in my life. I've missed it. I didn't know where I was in Dallas. I'm like, oh, and I kind of just slowly move over. But the problem is when she moved over, she was going too slow. A big semi hits her in the back, turns that one, hits another car. They flip over the side, and somebody dies. And she ends up getting convicted and being reckless. Or I think that may have been negligent homicide. But these things can happen, and so you got to be careful. And these are everyday things. I want to... There was...
it's just like there's so many things out there that want to eat you. If you're out in the woods or something, there's so many things that just want to consume you for lunch. There's so many things in the law book that can just screw you every day. I mean, we're sitting here right now probably doing something wrong.
That's what we said. There's how many would I say? There's 3.5 million laws on the books or more. I mean, it's growing every day.
That's why I like Trump. You bring a law, you got to take 2 off.
I don't have a problem with that rule. And so, well, I guess the more laws there are, the more money I make. I don't know which one is better. But so we talked about making a firearm accessible to a child. And so maybe we got the time I was trying to end with this. I think these are some good... And I said that day, we're sticking to that code section. So under that code section, technically they didn't violate it. Remember, I think one example was mom leaves her purse out on the couch, okay, and has the revolver open in the open purse, but it's not loaded. Mm-hmm. But the bullets are in the other pouch. Okay, technically, she doesn't fall under making a firearm accessible to a child because it's not readily dischargeable. There's no bullets in the weapon. It's not readily dischargeable according to the plain words of the statute. But I said that day, that does not mean that she could not possibly, that's a double negative there, she could still possibly be charged with some other kind of endangerment of a child, some other kind of criminal negligence, because that was so dangerous. Okay, it poses such a great risk to leave a firearm with bullets so near to a child that it would be obvious that danger would be possible, and the danger would be grave, that nobody would fail to perceive that risk, or she knew it was there, okay, and disregarded it anyway. And in fact, these kinds of things happen. There were cases where a child did just that and got and the parent got convicted. There's other cases where they get off. Okay, but I want to show you how dangerous these rules can be. Okay, and I've had several just my own experience with endangerment of the child cases, and I'll tell you, sometimes they make you irk. It's like, why did the DA do this? The DA's doing this because the CPS workers putting it on them. They really want to go after the parents. This is stupid. This could happen to any parent. The child's not even hurt bad. This could happen to anybody. Some of them really irk you, and then others, you're just like, man, you're dumb.
Yeah, you don't need to be a mother or father.
Exactly. And so And these cases are extremely hard, I think, from the defense standpoint. Just to scare you parents out there listening, are extremely difficult because it's got this negligence, right? And sometimes it doesn't have to be a negligent act. It can be a failure to act. So it can just be maybe you didn't perceive and you also didn't act. You should have acted. It's obvious in those cases where there's medical neglect, right? Where your kid's sick and needs to go to the hospital and you don't do anything. That's one of those obvious cases. But what about the cases like Williams in 2007? And in Williams in 2007, the mother had her kids at the grandma's house. And grandma's house has utilities, has water, has everything there. And so mom is wanting to go home. It's getting late. So she goes home. And she goes to her house that doesn't have any utilities. In fact, they have no lighting, and or very spotty lighting. The utilities don't work that well. So they routinely use candles, right, to save on electricity bill. And when the electricity gets cut off, they use candles to cut it on. And mom says, I'm going to go to the store. And grandmother actually says, no, don't do that. It's dangerous to have candles over there. You should stay over here, right? Just don't go over there. I have everything you need over here. Don't go. Well, she goes home anyway. And when she gets over there, she lights the candles just like she does every night. Well, she forgets something. She has to go to the store. Her boyfriend's there, who's a competent adult. No drugs involved. There's nothing like that going on. Competent adult. She said, I'll be back. I'm going to the store. So before she's able to come back, the candle fell off. The boyfriend fell asleep. Candle falls off the table. Ends up catching on some very flammable paint that was on the wall or something to that effect. House burns down and the two little girls die. She gets charged with, homicide and endangerment of a child and reckless conduct. And this was reckless. That she did not perceive this obvious and just outstanding, dangerous risk. And some of you people will say, there's nothing wrong with that. This is why we have to be outward looking. And this is why we talk about the Second Amendment rights. If you let one thing go, right, then you're going to open Pandora's box for prosecution in so many other scenarios. And in fact, the court says this: if taking children to spend the night in a structure without utilities is conduct that involves an extreme risk of danger for which one may be subject to criminal prosecution, should harm befall a child, the backwoods campers of the world are in serious jeopardy. Any adult who lights a campfire that emits a spark that lands on a child's pajamas and severely burns a child is prosecuted as a felon. Scoutmasters, beware. If a Coleman gas lantern tips over and set the child's pup tent ablaze, they might suffer the same fate. Parents who use a candle to read a bedtime story, they better be weary as well. Reading an hour in the candle tips over and burns the child. Any of these harms might befall the camper's child or anybody else's child who happens to light a candle in the house or happens to have a child in a house without utilities.
But that's different than the scenario you gave.
Is it?
It is, because that was an accident as compared to the candle mom left that's negligent.
Is it criminally, this is the point of the story, is it criminally negligent? What if you're camping and you leave the campfire and dad goes fishing, right, with Johnny, but leaves the two girls and mom back home and they fall asleep around the campfire?
But you had made comment before about things that are acceptable in the sense of reasonableness that everybody knows. Leaving a campfire unattended, everybody should know who camps out that that's not a good thing to do.
The state tried to make the same argument, and it was brought out that actually more house fires happen in houses without candles burning. Only 10% of all house fires happen, right, with an open flame. And per capita, right, it was greater as well, and most occurred from the utilities.
I can see
not from an open flame.
Because how often do people light their houses up with candles? It's usually with electric, and you have a faulty switch.
That's true. And so, but the same applies. This has never happened before. There was no reason to think that the boyfriend was incompetent to watch them.
You see, now that's a good point. She leaves with the boyfriend's there.
Who's competent?
But fell asleep. That was an accident. And it just happened to be an accident.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so if you leave a babysitter, this would open up anybody who has a babysitter for their children. The babysitter appears competent. They did a background check. Everything was good. Babysitter falls asleep. One of the kids goes and ends up falling off the roof of the house. The parents would be criminally negligent.
Wow. I'll tell you what, we're running out of time. Did you want to touch on this story real quick?
And that's what this is the story. I mean, you brought this up to me.
Look, ladies and gentlemen, I'm looking at an article in the paper, Temple Telegram here, just if you want to follow along. It's on. It was on Friday, 7A in the second front. A 7-month-old's shooting brings charge. Go ahead.
Yeah, and so that's just making a firearm accessible to the child. And I wanted to expand that and say that's why this firearm accessible to a child does not control every situation that you need to be responsible with your firearm, because you could do what we talked about in this other scenario with the purse and not violate the accessibility to a firearm to a minor statute, but at the same time it could be found to be negligent or even reckless. And not in every case, right? It's so fact intensive. I mean, maybe your child is trained has never done it before. You always kept it there. There was a good reason to think that nothing would happen. Maybe he had a nervous breakdown. There's reasons why you might not be found guilty, but don't put yourself in these situations. Just make sure that you're aware of what's going on, because it doesn't take much. And we see in some of these cases,
you made a comment
to be charged.
You made a comment about looking down the road. That's why I have conversations with people, and you sometimes are one of them, that I ask you questions. You're like, what are you asking me that for? It's because here's point A, and I'm looking down the road because I know things can happen, and I'm talking to you about D, and B hasn't even happened yet. It's because from history and experience, I know things can happen, and I go, well, what about this? Have we even thought about this? And I'm down the road already. And so people go, oh, you're boring. No, I'm not boring. I just know what can happen.
And it's a slippery slope, okay? And so that's what, again, I emphasize. Our prosecutors have a rough job at many times. They do. A lot of times they're overworked. They get paid the same. I like to. A lot of times prosecutors threaten me with trial. I'm like, if we go to trial, I make more money. You don't make any more money for a lot more work. So you're not threatening me with anything, right? You may be threatening my client, but you're not threatening me with anything. And so, I guess that goes into ego states. Why come after me? I'm just the attorney,
Adult now, right?
But they do have a rough job. Sometimes they're overworked. They have a lot of cases. They get paid the same no matter how many cases they try. And sometimes they're required to try cases, or the public gets mad at them. Sometimes it's a bad case and the public gets mad anyway. You got grand jurors, you got other judges, you got other politicians, you got officers, police, sheriff, everybody on your back. Okay, and so there's these pressures. That's why it takes a special person to be a prosecutor, and sometimes it takes courage to stand up to all these people and say, look, this really is a bad situation that it happened, but it's not a crime. And sometimes it's hard to do, and that's why we have our system.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have lots and lots of YouTube videos on my YouTube channel, Aaron's Gun Shop YouTube channel, of things of what Ross and I and Rick and I have talked about. If you have questions, it's probably been answered to some degree in those videos. You just need to go there, become a subscriber, and check it out. But Ross, you always do a great job. Rick, fantastic job, the whole works. Why don't you tell everybody how they can get a hold of you?
105 East Main Street is my primary office location here in Cameron. You can
what are
call
you doing
me.
in the back of the building, man?
Oh man, I'm better at suing general contractors than I am at being one. But no, I'm trying. It's been a long work. I was up. I don't think I slept trying to do can lights. Who knew recess lights? I went to law school. You'd think I'd be able to do recess lighting, but anyway. It'll be done here shortly. Maybe we can have a function out there. I was going to ask you, but anyway,
we'll do a show out there if we can.
That'd be great. But yeah, so come out and see us over here in Cameron. If you want to schedule an appointment in College Station or Houston, or just want to shoot the bull, give me a call at 254-605-4140. That's 254-605-4140. Again, we love emails. We love questions about the show. We love talking about legal issues if you have them, and advancing those things. You give us topics for the next show. Just make sure you leave your phone number when you email me at benton@watson.legal. That's BENTON @watson.legal.
Yeah, everybody, we're getting a lot of comments, emails, all that kind of stuff, questions. It's just better, if you can call the show, you can get it recorded for posterity, or so other people can take advantage of the questions that are being asked and hear the answers too. So, Ross, it's always a pleasure, man.
Yeah, thank you
Good to
guys.
see you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you, Rick.
Trey, let's take a real quick break. I'm going to come back and we're going to do some dates coming up, and then we'll get delicious Janae Goodman on here with another tactical snacking segment.